Hi, everyone. Welcome and good evening. My name is Nell Pepper, and on behalf of Harvard Bookstore, I am delighted to introduce this virtual event with Fatima Bhutto presenting her new novel, The Runaways, in conversation with Lisa Lucas. I hope you're all well and safe. Thank you so much for joining us virtually tonight. Through virtual events like tonight's, Harvard Bookstore continues to bring authors and their work to our community and our new digital community during these challenging times. Every week we'll be hosting events here on our Zoom account. And just like always, our event schedule will appear on our website at harvard.com, and you can sign up for our email newsletter for more updates. This evening's discussion will conclude with some time for your questions. If you have a question for our speakers at any time during the talk tonight, click on the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen and we'll get through as many questions as time allows. In the chat, I'll be posting a link to purchase copies of The Runaways on harvard.com, as well as a link to donate in support of this series and of our store. Your purchases and financial contributions make events like tonight's possible and help ensure the future of a landmark independent bookstore in Harvard Square. We thank you so much for showing up and tuning in support of our authors and of the incredible staff of booksellers at Harvard Bookstore. We sincerely appreciate your support now and always. And finally, as you may have experienced in virtual gatherings, technical issues may arise. If they do, we'll do our best to resolve them quickly. We thank you so much for your patience and understanding. And now, I'm pleased to introduce our speakers. Fatima Bhutto is the author of 5 previous books of fiction and nonfiction. Her debut novel, The Shadow of the Crescent Moon, was longlisted for the Bailey's Women's Prize for Fiction, and the memoir about her father's life and assassination, Songs of Blood and Sword, was published to wide acclaim. Lisa Lucas is Executive Director of the National Book Foundation and incoming Senior Vice President at Knopf Doubleday. Prior to joining National Book Foundation, she served as the publisher of Guernica magazine and the Director of Education at the Tribeca Film Institute. Tonight, they are discussing Fatima Bhutto's new novel, The Runaways. It is the story of 3 lonely young people from very different backgrounds and parts of the planet, and the lives they stumble through before meeting at a jihadi training camp in the Iraqi desert. The Guardian praises this is a bold and probing novel from a writer strikingly alert to something small and true, the disquietude of youth, the vulnerability and the foolishness, and how catastrophically it can be exploited. And now I'm honored to turn things over to our speakers. The digital podium is yours, Fatima and Lisa.
Thank you so much. Fatima, thank you so much. I'm so excited to talk to you about the book.
Me too. Thank you so much for doing this, Lisa. And thank you, Harvard Bookstore, for hosting us.
Of course. So, I feel like we always hear these descriptions of what a book's like, right? This is the book jacket copy. This is how, the introducer introduces it. But I always like to hear how the author wants to talk about the book. Like, what do you think it's about? What's your elevator pitch for what this book is?
Well, it always gets called a book about radicalization or radicalism or Muslim identity. And it is those things, but to me, it's a book about the weaponization of loneliness and the internet. And it's a book about how much pain one would have to be in to go to war against the world. And those wars are big wars, and they're small wars, they're personal wars, and they're impersonal wars. But that's really what it's about for me.
Yeah. And so with that, I think I asked you if you might read a little bit of a section to give us a sense of kind of that, the distance from, I think, the story that people think you might be wanting to tell and the story that you are telling. I think this section helps give you a sense of what that might be.
I'm gonna read a section from the latter part of the book, and it's between Sunny and Monty, 2 young boys who are on a march through really the desert on their way to what is going to be a battleground. Sunny sits on the broken pavement in front of a small fruit shop while he waits for his phone to charge. Empty cigarette boxes with the health warnings written in Arabic are crumpled and strewn across the street. Vegetable and fruit sellers are the only commerce on the road. Some sell only a few metal plates of produce, 2 onions and a few potatoes, while others are more bountiful. The man whose outlet Sunny is using comes out of his shop with a bucket filled with banana peel and watermelon rinds, which he chucks into the gutter by the curb. Monty paces up and down across the narrow street, keeping his distance from Sunny. He scratches his neck, inhaling painfully through his teeth as his nails break the skin, all red and bumpy from where a mound of ants got to him. Sunny opens his Facebook. It's been a while since he was on. He uploads a picture of Rita, his Kalashnikov, looking gorgeous, bless her. Hashtag Rita Diaries, hashtag Automatova, hashtag Thug Life. While he thinks of the right word for his post. 2 teenage boys ride a bicycle along the street, watching Monty and Sunny keenly as they cycle by slowly. Their eyes are red, and though they're kids, there's something haggard, something ghostly about them. Are you or is someone you love an apostate? What's an apostate, you ask? A traitor, a backstabber, a Judas, a Brutus, a man who turns his back on his family and his religion, a man who blasphemes just to fit in, who will do anything to be accepted by his oppressors, a man who betrays his people, his heritage. Apostates are everywhere. There's no place they can't reach and no damage they can't do, eating us up from the inside like cancer. The inside, you hear. Like bone marrow deep, coiled into the body like a virus, like poison. Coconuts, West toxified brothers in Hugo Boss suits doing cartwheels for the man, ex-Muslims, Muslim reformers. Sound familiar? They're your own blood, your own family. There's so much more Sunny wants to say, but he has to be careful now. He knows how to lie low. More than anyone out here, he has true practice in bottling up everything he feels, taking it subterranean, deep down. He dips into his Twitter account, a platform he's begun to use as the meta-expressions of his more substantial political posts. In a stretch of barbed wire, he writes, barbed down to the bone. But no one follows him out there. No one really understands the depth of what Sunny feels. My final stop isn't some godforsaken Iraqi village. I'm going all the way to the Holy Land. I'm flying straight to paradise. But how do you make a post go viral? Hashtags. But they're a pain to think of, especially given Sunny's unique situation. He leans over a plate of watermelon that the fruit seller cut up, finds the largest chunk and eats it messily over his lap, spitting the seeds out onto the road. He looks at his account. No retweets, no likes. He's got replies on Facebook already and he scans through them. But people don't really seem to get what he's saying. I'll stop there.
Thank you.
It's funny how cringy hashtags are when you say them out loud.
No, it's great.
But even when you see them like in posts, like you wonder, like, did someone really want to say this about themselves? And people put all kinds of weird stuff in their hashtags.
Right. And they're desperate for attention, right? That idea, that's why I thought that passage was such an interesting one to start with. Because, right, you're talking about radicalism. You're talking about, young people fleeing their homes and joining this movement, that is ultimately about violence and, repression. Yeah. But they really want to be popular and loved, and they're just kids. Yeah. And I think that's a really good place to start. I think in a lot of the interviews you've done, you've talked about sort of writing these characters with compassion, which is not necessarily the writing that I've read around young people who join these movements. It's mostly confusion or, some sort of misunderstood, interpretation of, disenfranchisement or, poverty. But, you take it and you really look at these young people from various different backgrounds and you just try to give them real whole lives. Why?
Well, I think it's dangerous not to. I think it's dangerous to fall into the trap that we are in all the time, thanks to the internet and the nonstop 24-hour nature of it, which is, sorting, condemn, like, okay, this is good, this is good, this is good. And we never look at the reasons very deeply. And it's been 20 odd years of that, you know. And I remember looking at a New York Times story maybe a year ago, and it was right at that moment where ISIS was breaking up in Syria. Essentially, their war was over. They were drifting into these refugee camps, and there was this discussion across the world about what do you do with people? Do you bring them home? Do you leave them there? You know, do you take away their passports? And the headline of this story, I mean, there was a picture of like these kids, and then the headline said, you know, is the child a refugee or a ticking time bomb? And I just remember thinking, how can you say that about a child? You know, how can you, I mean, how can you say that about an adult? You know, no person is a bomb. And if they've been stuffed with enough something to make them explosive, then really you should be asking what those things are. And I'm curious about that. I was always curious about that. You know, why would someone give up everything they've ever known? Why would they leave their families, their homes, their friends, their school? What would be strong enough to pull you away from all that? Mm-hmm. And then I did start to look, when I was doing the research for this book, I did start to look at all these accounts, because Tumblr, which you just mentioned a minute ago, used to exist back then. And a lot of it was on places like Tumblr. Mm-hmm. And even the hashtags we spoke about a second ago, they're so self-conscious, you know, and people telegraph what they feel, you know, no one can hide that. And everything I found really was of utter pain. Mm-hmm. You know, it was this bravado that the world was picking up and putting in their headlines. But I just saw pain everywhere.
Right. And how do you know, so I don't know if you followed a ton of the news about like Dylan Roof and a lot of these young people who are picking up guns, and, you know, how does that sort of same, you know, way of looking at these young people who drift into these, you know, sort of violent movements align with how we look at teenagers perhaps in the US or in the UK, wherever young people are sort of expressing their frustrations?
Well, I'm so glad you brought that up, because Dylan Roof is automatically distanced from his violence and automatically presented as this, like, what went wrong? Like, what a sweet kid, you know? Dylan Roof never has to be associated with the ugliness of what he does. Dylan Roof is always automatically excused from it. And there is this, you know, the innocence is only allowed to very few people. You know, if the guy with the gun is white, essentially, then he can maintain his innocence right till the end, you know? If the person happens to be a Muslim, well, forget it, you know, then there's no question of innocence. You know, you're never going to have the chance to say, oh, well, I came from a nice home and I was really just disturbed by. And I think that those are two extremes and they're both wrong. You know, the headline of Chris Tarrant, the guy who went into the mosque in New Zealand and murdered 50 people in cold blood, was always like,
Christchurch, right?
What happened to this wonderful gym instructor who just became angry one day? You know, that's too excusing. And then, you know, the guy who joins ISIS is automatically like barbarian, you know, human time bomb, slaves, village. That's too far. There has to be somewhere in the middle where we look at the ugliness of what someone does and just ask why.
Right. And so, you know, the ways that we sort of look at, you know, the ways that we look at Muslim folks around the world, it really varies, right? You know, in Pakistan, it's one thing. In the US, it's another thing. In the UK, it's a whole other thing. Have you noticed a real difference in sort of reception to your sort of really, you know, researched, empathetic, you know, description of how children, you know, become demoralized within their circumstances, have questions, concerns, want friends, are lonely, and how they drift? You know, do you feel that different audiences have received this book in different ways? I know in Australia,
I think
that coverage proceeded here, right?
Yeah, I think that the topic is complicated and the topic is uncomfortable, and that can put people on a kind of edge. But I haven't felt that once people start to read or we start to talk, because it kind of falls away when you start to look at people before the dangers that they fall into and that they bring to others. You know, we were in Australia together last year in the the good times, I'm now calling it.
In the before.
Not the great before, but the good times, the pre-pandemic life. And when we were in Sydney, I spoke about the Runaways, and I'll always remember this one woman who came up to me afterwards, and she was quite young, like I think she was in college, she must have been 18, 19. And at the book signing afterwards, she came up to me and she said, "Oh, I read your book, and thanks." And she said, I'm born here and I live here, and that's nice. And she said, but I'm Muslim.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt like she wanted to say something to me, and so I leaned closer over the table, and she said, "I'm scared." And I waited, and she said, "And I want you to tell me how not to be." And I think more than issues of radicalism, that's the kind of response that I've picked up in the different places that the Runaways has been,
mm-hmm.
is people's fear. Right. And that fear is different in Australia, it's different in Pakistan. I remember doing talks in London last year as well, and people were saying, "I'm afraid," to me as well, but they were saying, "I'm afraid because all these kids who ran away are going to come back home. And what do we do with them when they come back home?"
Right.
And so that seems to be the thread that's
right.
pretty universal.
How does fiction, I mean, it's like we have obviously a racism problem in our country, just period. I'm no longer making qualifications. It's an issue nationally.
Yeah.
What does a work of fiction like this do if you can get people to read the work? What do you think it does to sort of help to repair some of the misunderstandings and fear that underpins a lot of this racism?
I think it draws you into those small, intimate spaces you would never know otherwise. It forces you to live quietly in the lives of others. Mm-hmm. And we're not used to being quiet anymore. We have cable news, which, is sort of screamy and ranty and shouty. And then we go on Twitter and we are shouty about things like we genuinely have no idea about, or people we don't know. We get angry, and then we go on Instagram and we pretend to be something we aren't, and then we go onto Facebook, and I don't know what people just subvert democracy. I don't know what people do on Facebook, but
Facebook is the cesspool now. So
it's just, I think, the most dangerous thing. The most dangerous.
That's where your cousins are. The cousin with the opinion you never wanted to know.
Yeah.
Although you still love them. It's like you can still love your family if you don't go on Facebook.
Yeah. Except that cousin has billions of dollars and he's going to destroy the world. So, that's the Facebook equivalent of your cousin. But so I think we don't exist in an age or a time where we are forced to be quiet and to watch and to observe. And when you are forced to do that, you can't but sympathize, you can't but empathize. Even when someone does something terrible, when you're forced to watch them quietly, you see something of why, maybe not the full why, but you have a glimmer, when you're forced to watch someone having a joyous moment, not forced, but when you are quietly watching someone have a joyous moment, you smile too, you can't help it. You're brought into it somehow by the act of witnessing. And I think that's always going to be the most incredible power.
Mm-hmm. So, in the story, as we explore the lives of these characters, we also find out about their families and their lives and who they are and where they came from, which actually, beyond just sort of talking about how a young person becomes radicalized or becomes disenfranchised or, runs away, period, into whatever nonsense they're going to run away into. You also learn about a variety of different Muslim families. Why is it important for us to sort of, and this is I know the answer to this, but I would love to hear you talk about sort of why it is important for us to think about the diversity of types of family, rich, poor, from different nations. Why do we need to really open our eyes and be more imaginative about what it is to be Muslim?
Well, I think, for me, it came really in the middle of the process because I'd written this entire novel not doing that. I'd written the first drafts of The Runaways were all already in the zone of violence and action and terror. And they were kind of fighty and dangerous. And it just, something wasn't working, and it wasn't working, and it wasn't working. And then I spoke to an old editor, the editor who edited Shadow of the Crescent Moon, and she'd read it, and she said, why don't you stop for a moment and just go back into their lives? And the moment she said it, I thought, oh, that's what's missing. That's the heart of everything, ultimately. And when I started to do that, they became so much clearer to me. And all those things, all those little anchors, the things that keep you home, and then the things that drive you to do desperate, terrible things became apparent. And I wasn't thinking of it so much as how our Muslim families different, though of course they're all the families you see are incredibly different. But I was thinking of it in particular in the ways in which people's roles are never quite clear. They're always nebulous, to each other, to themselves. The responsibility, the isolation that families create within four walls, the pain that they inflict on each other, and then are wondering why one of them has gone off and done something awful to someone else. That's what I was thinking about. And it became incredibly important for all the characters. And the one that I really saw kind of immediately was Sunny. And Sunny is the young man who lives in Portsmouth in England, and his parents migrated from Lucknow in India. And his father has this utterly romantic, delusion, this fantasy of what it means to be a migrant. And it's so different. It's so heartbreakingly different from Sunny's experience of being a migrant. And that's something that you can only see in a family, how much it means to Sunny and how little his father sees it. You can't tell that. You always have to show it.
Right. So, you said earlier when we were talking just before we got on here that you really loved Sunny. Why do you love these characters, even though they're going through, all manner of, bad things, but why do you love them, and each one?
Well, I think it's impossible, for me at least, it would be impossible to write a novel without a deep and true feeling of love for at least one of them, if not all of them. And, I get people say that their characters are like their children and like you love them equally, but I don't think that's true at all. I think it's a total lie. I think you always love someone more than someone else. And the reasons are different. So when I thought of this book, when this book came to me, it was a story of two boys. It was a story of Monty and Sunny, who come from not just different worlds, but different universes, different planets. And that these two boys would be thrown together and forced to coexist, though they can't stand each other. That's what I immediately thought of for the book. And then as I wrote, all these other different people grew up around them, like Layla and Anita Rose and their families. But I love Sunny because of how much life he throws away, how much he never had to do it.
Right.
If somebody had seen him in time, and if somebody had caught him in time and said, "What are you doing?" And he gives it all, he throws everything away, he burns his life essentially. And I, even as I watched him do it, just wanted so much for him to be saved, even as I knew he couldn't be. Monty, I have to say, is the one I probably love the least, but I suppose if I had to love him for something, I love it because Monty comes from a very different world than Sunny's. He's not a migrant. He lives in Karachi. He lives in the best neighborhood in Karachi. He goes to the most expensive private school. He has a family that denies him nothing except their love and their attention. And what is honorable about Monty for me is the fact that though he wants for nothing, he is aware that what he has is not enough, that there must be something bigger to the world. And that the pursuit of that something bigger is a noble pursuit. And that's what I loved about him, even when I found him just kind of gormless and hopeless, and making enormous mistakes.
Right.
Layla, I loved for her defiance. And I'll just say a little bit about the female characters. There's two different backstories. Layla is a young woman who materializes in Monty's last year of high school. And she arrives at this private school where, you know, everyone knows each other and everyone's parents know each other. And this girl materializes out of thin air and nobody really knows where she's come from and who she is and why she's there. And she upends Monty's world, and she's got a lot of mystery about her. But she's a striking character for her defiance, and I always loved that about her. And then Anita Rose is the other female character, and she is also from Karachi, but she's from a very different neighborhood than Monty. She lives in a slum with her mother and her brother. And her mother is a massage woman, who are these women who go around to people's homes with these little plastic bags of scented oils and massage rich women, essentially. And Anita Rose is a lonely child, in a ferocious atmosphere who somehow survives. And I love that about her. I love that. I love the pursuit of surviving that she takes incredibly seriously.
Right. So, sort of jumping into another area, I feel like, right, when you wrote this book, we had not experienced a global pandemic. We were not all on Zoom, and the internet is our primary interpersonal form of communication.
Yeah.
But you're talking about young people that are isolated in some form or fashion without a pandemic going on, who are using the internet as a way to find community and ultimately leaving their lives and giving a whole lot up to go do something very scary.
Yeah.
What do you think, now that we've reached pandemic, what do you think this means for the whole world? Like, you really are looking at the real reasons why people, you know, join these movements.
Yeah.
And what do you worry about, you know, just having done the research and thinking about these young people? What do you worry about for all of us?
That's such a good question. I worry about how scared we are of each other. I worry about the incredible hysteria that has accompanied, like, a very real fear. Mm-hmm. And that makes me nervous. It makes, as somebody who very much needs people and mm-hmm. needs contact with people, needs to watch them and needs to talk to them and needs to be among them. It does scare me to know that suddenly when someone sits next to you somewhere, you shrink from them, you know, where we now watch people for all these irrelevant things like how healthy they look, or, yeah. You know, it's like a bad movie. It also scares me as well how we already live in suspicious times. Right. You know, we're already tracking people and we're already nervous about strangers. And we're already looking for difference. And it does worry me that you can see so much less of people. I mean, of course, wear your mask. We all have to wear masks. And the first Zoom thing that I had to do, I actually almost put on a mask for it because I was so well trained for mask wearing. But I miss the little cues, you know, yeah, that you share with people, that like small laugh, or
it's kind of a world without context. It's just like you get the big screaming tweet that just says, I mean, I tweeted when I was like, you know, I'm as interested in herd immunity as I am in a high colonic, you know, which is not a particularly nuanced thought, you know, but it's like we're all having these really, really,
yeah,
you know, focused.
And the other thing that I think is dangerous is that because we can't have touch anymore, you know, because that's fatal now, because we can't have smiles and we can't have proximity and closeness. We will have to be so much warmer and kinder with our language. And we're just not, you know. I mean, nothing I've seen points towards any of us being warmer or
and for
kindness.
kids outside of school context and very isolated, and everybody doesn't love their parents. Everybody does not have a good time growing up with their parents, but they're stuck in. And so I worry, we're obviously talking about young Muslim children who've joined a very specific movement, right? But it's like, but I worry in America, I worry in the UK, I worry everywhere around the entire world that kids are more susceptible to things that include them.
Yes,
Yeah.
and you're right. It's. I think we're also caught up in our own experiences of lockdown. But really, what do you do if you're in a family that's terrible and you
Yeah.
can't get away from them? What will you do to get away from them?
Right.
There's a very good book. I just read this book called I don't know why this reminded me of that. The Luminous Republic by Andres Barba. And it's this kind of creepy, slim novel about this town, this fictional town that suddenly has these children appear, these like 32 children appear out of nowhere one day. And they're just kind of homeless and feral. And it did make me think of the pandemic. It made me think of new kinds of runaways and the ways in which we'll try and escape now.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And so just one more thought about that fear, right? Like, we talked a lot about being afraid, what young people are afraid of, just people in general having fear of one another. But, you are a Muslim woman, right, from a political family, and you're writing a book about something that is extraordinarily polarizing. You're researching it. I mean, presumably you have a laptop and a cell phone on which you do these searches. Did you have fear writing this book, publishing this book, doing events around this book, or when events were real?
Yes, I mean, all three and all different. When I was researching the book in the great before, I used to travel a lot, and there were so many times, and I can think of a few in particular, where I would be at an airport and just be approaching immigration and think, oh my God, I didn't close my tabs. And thinking, well, I'll just say I'm with the truth. I'm writing a novel, and then realizing like, oh my, nobody will. I have a Pakistani passport. Like nobody will ever believe me. I was born in Afghanistan. But that it never came to pass. Actually, I made it traveling with the research. I did kind of panic about my history because I thought, God knows what websites I've visited, and it'll all be stored there. But at least now I have a book, and I can say. And then publishing it has been challenging. It's been a struggle. It's been a struggle, and people don't want to talk about Muslims. People have no interest in talking about Muslim worries, Muslim anxieties, Muslim fears. They just want to talk about like Muslim danger, but they don't actually want to spend time thinking about what it must be like for young Muslims to grow up in a century where they are the most reviled community from this side of the world to that side.
Which is shocking. I mean, just even from a U.S. perspective. I mean, I don't know what the size of the U.S. Muslim population is, but I cannot imagine that it's insignificant. It must be enormous.
Is it 15%?
Yeah, I mean, it's some probably huge number.
But what's fascinating? If you look at the conventions, your election conventions, the Democrats didn't have one Muslim. They didn't give a platform to one Muslim. Not, Ilhan Omar or Rashida Tlaib, because you've got congresswomen who are Muslim for the first time. Not them, and they're Democrats, and they're quite, young, inspiring, progressive people. But not even just people from the community. There's a Muslim ban. Like Muslims from certain countries are not allowed into America. How can you not give space? And I just think it goes to show that if the left doesn't want to talk or hear from Muslims, imagine what the right feels.
Right. No, I mean, it's extraordinarily difficult. And I think that this book is so important. For that reason alone. It's important for lots of reasons. You're a wonderful writer. It's like you've gotten to sort of the truth of these, characters that you've invented. But it's also just sort of like, we have to have a literature and a film apparatus and all of these things that actually sort of treat people who are other. I mean, I don't even know if anybody's other anymore. It's about to be minority majority in 5 minutes. But, we have to have these stories that are actually compassionate and sympathetic and holistic.
Yeah. And what I was happy about in the great before, I just like saying it, was when I did it, real life events for this book. I didn't get to do them sadly in America, but in other places in the world, I was really pleased to find that people were not angry or hostile or panicked. You know, people that didn't know about that experience came to talk about it, came to find out more. People who had that experience came to ask, why didn't you write about this? Or why didn't, that get put in the book? And actually, it's so incredibly important to have that, to have space in which people who don't know each other can spend a bit of time together.
And a book creates that audience. It's like, I think that that's like the more that we publish, the more that we think about the sort of diversity, around the planet of human life, the more we can actually be empathetic and thoughtful and have constructive conversations about what we do and what we don't actually know. So I thank you for adding, to the body of literature that we have that actually does that work. I am been told to go to questions from the audience now, although I could ask you 6 million more, including about your t-shirt, which I quite like. But the first question is, what do all these young people have in common that allows them to be brainwashed and recruited? Can you comment on the power of feeling like you fit in or our need as humans to fit in?
I think that the thing that they all have in common is that none of them see a space for themselves in their societies or in their cities or their communities for whatever reason. Mm-hmm. Anita Rose is somebody that is excommunicated because of poverty, because of inequality. She doesn't exist for her city. She lives on the fringes of her city. No one sees her. No one cares to imagine what she goes through. Sunny is excluded because he's comes from a migrant background, because Sunny doesn't look like your typical English person, even though he's changed his name, even though he's adapted his speech, even though he's done everything he can to fit in, they don't want him. Monty is excommunicated personally rather than societally, but I think that's it. I think it's the vulnerability that comes from not knowing where you belong and not knowing if you have a future where you are. And we talk about that a lot in a kind of where do I belong way, but it's a dangerous thing not to have a place where you feel safe. Right. And then my t-shirt was actually, hold on, I bought it it was a Beirut charity.
Oh, cool.
To raise money for the city of Beirut, but it's Palestine. And it's this wonderful studio that did it.
That's beautiful.
The internet. So the internet does do good things.
All right. I have a couple more for you. Such a great conversation around fear. And Fatima brought up pain. How can we come together vulnerably about this as humans? Can fiction be even more powerful than a book club, or fiction in a book club, perhaps? And thank you for your time tonight, she said, or he.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I think any platform, any arena in which you have a space to talk about fear and to share it, I think is incredibly, incredibly important. Whatever community allows you to do that, whether it's a book club or you and your book by yourself or anywhere, is necessary. And we don't have that enough. Even all these things we have at the touch of a button, they're to incite fear, but they're never to commiserate. Right. I've never been on Twitter and had someone say, "Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. I'm here for you. Do you want to talk about it some more?" Never,
And I think this book is actually like, a good way to talk about, right now we're in a pandemic. Everyone is absolutely terrified, full stop, period, right? And so sometimes looking at someone else's experience, one allows you to be with their experience and to, empathize with somebody who's not you, but also using someone else's experience helps you drill down on what you're dealing with now. So I think that looking at something that's further away from your life, if it happens to be, can teach you a little bit about the kind of fear we're looking at right now.
Absolutely. And I think just, in this pandemic, like the thing I've seen repeatedly is the culture pushing us to make it productive, to make it successful, to do more, to, oh, look who earned more, you know, what, but the culture never stopped and said, you know, this is a time in which these questions can be asked of us, you know, and they have nothing to
How
do
could we
with,
be better? How could
yeah,
we take this time to become better humans or to learn more about each other? It's certainly not been the,
it just doesn't exist. And I think books, as you said, are a very powerful way of doing that. And book clubs too. I think book clubs are kind of like group therapy, aren't they?
and books, I don't, every time I read a book, I don't always understand the book. I love doing these talks. You know, whenever I'm interviewing an author, it's like, it's nice because I get a book club of two with the person who wrote it, right? Because it's like, you get to actually, well, what did I miss? What didn't I understand? The framing. I once asked an author, I was like, well, you know, why is this an important addition to like sort of Southern literature? And she was like, talking about regional literature is so like obnoxious and invented by people on the East Coast who consider themselves to be the mainstream. And I was like, huh, you know, so you have a way, you know, to sort of just like learn more. You're not
Yeah.
supposed to, it's slow, hard work reading a book, and it's layered. If it's a good book, it's got lots of, you know,
Yeah.
different through lines that you can follow along with and different ways you can interpret it. So I feel like book clubs help with that so much.
Yeah. Yeah. We need more of slow thinking in our lives.
Mm-hmm. Meg
Mm.
Wolitzer always says that she's the master of the warm take, which is my favorite line ever, right? You know, but books do sort of, it's like, it's not, you know, they can be topical and of
Yeah.
the moment, but they're not hot, right? They're not like, oh my God, this is like the thing that I came up with, you know, in my dream last night and I spat it out onto the internet. You know, it's like, it's more thoughtful.
It's so true because also it's impossible to keep up with hot takes, you know. It's impossible to keep up with of the moment books or articles or movies or show. I like there's not enough hours in the day.
Right.
And really what I want is someone who spent a lot of time thinking about something.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that deserves its own time, which one is ready to give to it, I think.
Right. Agree.
I like that.
All right, we've got another one. It says, in one passage in the Runaways, it reads, "What's next?" Layla snarled, springing out of her chair. "All lives matter." Please, may we have your thoughts on Layla's response, so similar to the issues today with the BLM and All Lives Matter demonstrations.
Yeah, that's so fun. I'm trying to think when did I write that because I must have turned the book in. Oh yeah,
Although we've been dealing with this All Lives Matter nonsense for a long time.
a long time.
It's been a long time now. I mean,
Must have
Ferguson
been,
was not yesterday.
yeah, no, but it was like spring 2018 when this book was turned in, or maybe end 17. And the passage that comes in is Layla's in her American school, her Karachi American school, and she's in her history class, and they're talking about the age of exploration, which is how I learned about colonialism in my American school in Karachi. And I must have been, 19 years old before someone just called it colonialism. It was always called, like in our history book, it was always like the age of adventure, the age of exploration. That's how it was portrayed. And Layla's in a class where this is how colonialism is being presented to her. And these like dashing Spanish explorers going and murdering all the natives in South America. And she reacts like that, and she questions.
May never recover from the age of adventure for colonialism.
No, it's a thing. Yeah, age of exploration, and she sort of attacks the teacher, and he's like a bit like, calm down. This every side has two stories. And that's where she says, what's next? All lives matter. And yeah, it's sad when you write things that turn out to be like equally repeated by real people in the real world, but it's incredible when you think about these things, when people whose countries have been colonized wish to speak about the ravages of colonialism, and they're told it's a long time ago, can't you just let go, or they're told, oh yeah, but we made you the railroads, shouldn't you be pleased? Railroads that they use to ferry all your goods and resources out of your country. It's the same with this conversation about all lives matter. Why is it so hard to say Black Lives Matter? I mean, why is there an answer to that?
You can't say Black Lives Matter. It's going to be even harder to say reparations.
Oh yeah, and these are conversations which these are conversations that they're happening today. They're already 100 years too late. You know, they're already 50 years too late. This is not the time to come up with but the
Yeah.
real, but all
Right.
that.
It's insane.
Ah,
All right, another one. How do we approach discussing, critiquing issues in the West, especially regarding oppression towards Eastern minorities, Muslims, etc., when it can serve as firepower for others to reach the wrong conclusion or can put you in the wrong box as a suspect / terrorist?
oh. Well, you know, the Patriot Act is still in force, right? I mean, that's going to be enforced for perpetuity. So according to that, everything you do is surveilled, like every book you buy, every website you visit, any movie you watch or, you know, rent, or, all of that is being watched. And the case being made against you is already being made.
Mm-hmm.
You know, England has something similar. I'm forgetting what it's called now. Prevent. It's a completely ludicrous system, and the idea of this thing is to like prevent people from being radicalized and turned into extremists. But the things that they think turn you into an extremist are like a Google search or reading an article or, you know, liking a post. And those are not the things that turn you into extremists.
Right.
So it's a good question because it points to how uncomfortable it is to question things in an ultra uber surveilled environment. But I don't think that means we don't do it. I think it means we have to be incredibly sophisticated about our questioning, and we have to take the time to learn and to research and to really be thorough. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, because if you think of all the disinformation and the fake news that's floating around everywhere, I think it's important for us to read beyond a tweet or a Facebook post and to really try to get to the bottom of things. One has to do that, and that's constant work, and I suppose they make it dangerous because it's so urgent to ask those questions. It's uncomfortable.
Thank you. Another one. I think we have time for one or two more, so get them in if you've got them. There's so much money and work these days pumped into countering violent extremism, especially in the youth, but perhaps not actually against all violent extremism, which is an addition I just made to that question. How do you avoid cliches and stereotypes when writing about radicalization?
Yeah, unfortunately, you see it all the time. I mean, there was a discussion on American TV, I can't remember what the channel is, just the other day, where Joanne Reed was talking about, like, what was she talking about? I'm not even sure, like riots and things like that. And she said, well, this is how we're used to talking about Muslim people. Or she said something that, you know, if you're Muslim, it was all over the internet, and it catches you off guard. It catches you in the heart, you know, because it's this just immediate assumption that like you are a violent people or you are the type of people that do. And unfortunately, the discourse we all inhabit does this to anyone who is not the mainstream. You know, it does this to anyone.
Except how many Muslim people are there on the planet?
I mean, there's more than 1 billion of us.
Which is just insane to be able to, like, just
1.5 billion maybe? Or, I mean, an incredible amount, you know, and it's an incredibly diverse, as every community is, it's an incredibly diverse community, but just the idea to say, like, this is how they behave.
Right.
Or, you know.
With our little 325 million Americans.
Yeah, and not only that, like, even if you look at all the data, I mean, you know, you're more likely to be killed in a terror attack by a neo-Nazi than you are by a Muslim, you know. It's all there, but yet the stereotypes persist. And how do you avoid them? I think you have to catch them, you know. I think there was a long period where we kind of let a lot slide because we thought, well, yeah, it's not fair, but on the other hand, and I think we just have to stop all the time and say, sorry, what do you mean by that?
And we can perpetuate stereotypes against our own groups and associations. Like, it's like, I'm not, you know, immune to sort of believing the hype or to, you know, listening to what people are feeding me. So it's like, do you have to unlearn that stuff? Do you have to, like, you know, are there, you know, people you look to for sort of like how to address, you know, how to deal with?
I think you're constantly learning yourself, you know. I mean, I'm guilty of a lot of commentary on going through airports, of course, it is also true that you do get stopped a lot. But I have plenty of other experiences at airports that I don't, And so I think it's a process of 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 learning and being conscious and being careful with language, which is something we have to do now more than ever.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's hard. I mean, and I think you've done a beautiful job, really trying to sort of navigate. We've got a question from Dustin Shell.
Hi,
Hi,
Dustin.
Dustin. And it's our last question. We love you. Can you talk about the use of poetry as a device within the novel, as well as what these Urdu poets mean to the characters and what they mean to you?
Oh, thank you, Dustin, for your wonderful question. Poetry in a South Asian context is so important because for us, poetry is a living, breathing, beating, pulsing thing. And it's such an important part of our everyday. It's a culture that sings poetry, that turns poetry into hour-long concerts, that recites poetry by memory, that respects poetry. And so it's the thing that makes the unsurvivable survivable. It's a sort of sword in battle. And the poets that I used in this book, especially the Urdu poets, did that. So one of the poets I use is a poet called Habib Jalib, who Anita Rose comes across. And Habib Jalib was a phenomenal poet who was writing in the age of a brutal dictatorship. And he embarrassed and tormented and threatened that dictatorship through his poetry. Mm-hmm. What can you do to a poet? A poet survives everything. A poet's afraid of nothing. And it, to me, is really the heart of what is so brave and what is so, resilient is such a icky word now, but what is so resilient about Pakistan as a culture, the way in which it uses art to question, to dissent, and to resist. And so I'm always moved by that. And so I very sneakily made another character in the book moved by that, just so I could put a bit of poetry in. But I've always loved poetry, and it really does make the unbearable bearable in a lot of.
Your cheeky character snuck in so that there could be more poetry.
Yeah, I think writers do that, don't they? They just take things they like and make someone else like them just so they can use them.
That's why I like you guys. So that is all the time I think that we have for questions, but I just want to say thank you for writing this. And, I'm sure that we'll hear from the store about buying this beautiful book and about all of the people who are really brilliant telling you why you should buy it. Perhaps you have a copy, that's why you're here. Now is a good time to get one for your mom or your dad or your friend or like the person you're going on Zoom dates with. There is never a bad reason to support this book, to support Verso, to support Harvard Bookstores, to support our darling Fatima, who's written a really stunning piece of work. So that's my 2 cents about why you should, if you can, open up that wallet and grab a copy.
Thank you. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you so much.
What a treat to talk to you. It's always such a pleasure. And you're so brilliant and wonderful and have on great clothes all the time. And it's just like, I can't wait until we can meet again in real life.
Me too. Me too. Thank you, Lisa. And thank you to everyone who sent in questions. What great questions. And I just want to say as well that I was just a year ago at the bookstore with another book. And so many wonderful people came and asked even like wonderful questions then too. So thank you to the bookstore for just always giving us the space to have these conversations.
Thank you so much to both of you, to Fatima and Lisa, for this beautiful conversation that can you teach me how not to be scared. Whew, I'm going to be thinking about that for a long time. And thanks to everyone out there for spending your evening with us. And I have posted the link for to purchase the Runaways and also the donate button if you feel so inclined. Yes, there's the beautiful cover. Thank you so much. To please follow those links to learn more about the book and about the store. On behalf of Harvard Bookstore in Cambridge, have a lovely night. Please keep reading. Please stay safe and well. And same to both of you. Thanks all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.